My children put me in a nursing home. They didn't know I still owned the family business. My children signed the papers on a Friday morning. By that afternoon, they had already sold my furniture, packed my clothes, and driven me to a small room with a view of a parking lot. They told everyone I was getting the care I needed. What they did not tell anyone was the real reason. They needed me gone, quietly, so they could sell the company I spent 40 years building for $450 million without asking me a single question. They thought I was just a tired old man who would sit in that small room and fade away. They forgot one thing. They forgot that I never actually gave up control. Not really. Not on paper, not in any way that mattered. And when they walked into that boardroom, ready to sign away everything I had built, they had no idea I was about to walk in right behind them. This is the story of how my own children tried to steal my life's work, and how I took it all back, in front of everyone. Stay until the end. What happens in that boardroom you will not forget. My name is Robert Hayes. I am 68 years old. For 40 years, I built a furniture company from nothing. I started with one small workshop and 2 workers. By the time I was 60, Hayes Furniture had 12 factories and more than 2,000 employees. I built this company with my hands. I built it with my sweat. I built it for my children. But my children did not want the company. They wanted the money. I have 3 children. James is the oldest. He is 42 years old. He works in finance. He always wears expensive suits. He always talks about numbers, never about people. Then there is Diane. She is 39. She is smart, very smart, but she is cold. She never hugs me. She never says, "I love you, Dad." She only says, "Dad, we need to talk about the business." And then there is my youngest, Michael. He is 35. He is the quiet one. I always thought he was different from the other 2. I was wrong. My wife Susan died 5 years ago. Cancer took her slowly. For 2 years I watched her get weaker every day. When she died, something in me died too. I stopped going to the office as much. I let my children take over more and more of the business. I trusted them. That was my first mistake. After Susan died, I was alone in our big house. The house had 6 bedrooms. Susan and I raised 3 children there. But after she was gone, the house felt like a tomb. Every room reminded me of her favorite chair, her garden, her photos on the wall. I became lonely, very lonely. My children saw this loneliness, but they did not see a father who needed love. They saw an old man who was weak. They saw an opportunity sober. It started small. James began coming to my office more often. He would sit across from my desk and talk about the future of the company. He would say things like, "Dad, you have done so much. Don't you think it's time to relax? Time to enjoy your life?" I did not understand what he really meant. I thought he cared about me. Diane started coming to the house every Sunday. She would bring food, she would sit with me and talk. But she always brought papers too. Papers about the company. Papers about planning for the future. She would ask me to sign things. I trusted her. I signed many papers without reading them carefully. That was my second mistake. Michael was quieter. He did not push like James. He did not bring papers like Diane. But he watched. He listened. And later, I would learn. He reported everything back to his brother and sister. One evening in March, all 3 of my children came to my house together. This was strange. They never all came at the same time. When I saw all 3 cars in my driveway, I felt something was wrong. But I still opened the door with a smile. They were my children. I loved them. We sat in the living room. James spoke first. "Dad," he said, "we've been talking. All 3 of us. We're worried about you." "Worried about what?" I asked. "You're alone in this big house," Diane said. "You're getting older. What if something happens to you? What if you fall, and no one is here to help?" "I'm fine," I said. "I have my routine. I go to the office. I see my friends." "Dad," Michael said, and this surprised me because he rarely spoke first. "We found a place. A very nice place. It's called Sunrise Meadows. It's a retirement community. You would have your own room. There are doctors there, nurses, people your age to talk to. You wouldn't be alone anymore." I felt my chest tighten. "You want to put me in a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home, Dad," James said quickly. "It's a retirement community. It's very different. It's beautiful there. They have a garden, a pool, activities every day." I looked at my 3 children. I looked at their faces. I wanted to see love. I wanted to see children who were worried about their father's safety. But something in their eyes was different. It was not worry, it was impatience. I don't want to leave my home, I said. This is where I raised you. This is where your mother and I built our life. Dad, please, Diane said, and her voice became softer, more gentle. We just want what's best for you. This house is too big for one person. Too many stairs. Too much to take care of. At Sunrise Meadows, you won't have to worry about anything. You can just relax. I want to tell you something important. I was not a fool. I built a company from nothing. I negotiated contracts with banks and suppliers for 40 years. I knew how to read people. But when it comes to your own children, something happens to your mind. You want to believe them. You want to believe that your children love you and only want good things for you. This desire is stronger than logic. This desire made me blind. Let me think about it, I said. Of course, Dad, James said. Take your time. But they did not give me time. Over the next month, they visited more and more. Every visit, they talked about Sunrise Meadows. They showed me photos. They told me stories about how happy other old people were there. Diane brought brochures. Michael talked about how much easier life would be. And slowly, I started to believe them. I did not know then that while they were convincing me to leave my house, they were also doing something else. Something behind my back. Something that would change everything. They were taking control of my company. I want to explain something about Hayes Furniture, because this is important for the rest of my story. When I built the company, I structured it carefully. I owned 60% of the shares myself. The other 40% was split between investors and, later, my children, who each received 10% when they turned 30 as part of their inheritance planning. This means on paper my children only had 10% each, 30% total. I still had the majority. I still had control. But there was something my children did not fully understand. Something my old lawyer, a man named Walter Kim, had built into the company structure many years ago, before Walter retired. There was a special class of shares, founder shares. These shares gave me extra voting power, even if my percentage of ownership changed. As long as I held even 10% of the company through founder shares, I would have the final decision on anything major, like selling the company or removing the CEO. My children did not know about the founder shares. Walter kept this information very private. Even my children's lawyers, when they checked the company records, only saw the normal ownership structure. The founder shares were registered under a separate legal entity, a trust that Walter had set up decades ago. It was old paperwork, filed under a different name, the Hayes Family Legacy Trust. This detail will matter very much later in my story. Remember it. In April, 2 months after my children first mentioned Sunrise Meadows, Diane came to my house with more papers. Dad, these are just some updates for the company, she said. James is going to take on more responsibility as CEO. We need you to sign here, transferring the day-to-day operations to him. You'll still be chairman, of course. This is just for practical purposes, so the company runs smoothly while you focus on your health and happiness. I looked at the papers. They were long, full of legal language. I was tired that day. I had not been sleeping well since Susan died. My eyes were tired too. Can I read this later? I asked. Of course, Dad, Diane said. But if you could sign today, it would really help James. He has a board meeting on Monday, and he needs this to show the investors that the transition is official. I trusted my daughter. I trusted my son. I signed the papers. What I signed that day gave James the title of Chief Executive Officer. It gave him control over daily operations, hiring, spending, and business decisions. I remained chairman of the board, which sounded important, but really, it meant very little in daily practice. I did not know this at the time. I thought I was still in control. Over the next few weeks, more papers came. Each time one of my children would visit, and each time there was something new to sign, a change in the management structure, new authority for the finance department, which Diane now controlled, new responsibility for Michael in family relations and estate planning, which sounded harmless but was actually about controlling my personal assets. I signed almost everything. I trusted my children completely. By June, 3 months after that first family meeting, I had, on paper, given away almost all practical control of my company. James ran daily operations. Diane controlled the money. Michael managed my personal estate. I was still the majority owner. I still held the founder's shares, though I barely thought about them, since Walter had passed them into that old trust so many years ago, and I hadn't looked at those documents in over a decade. But I had given away every practical tool of power. And then, in July, I moved into Sunrise Meadows. I remember that day very clearly. My children helped me pack. James rented a truck for my furniture, though he told me I could only bring a small amount, since my room at Sunrise Meadows was much smaller than my house. Diane packed my clothes. Michael boxed up my photos and books. I remember standing in my empty living room, looking at the space where Susan's favorite chair used to be. It was already gone, sold or donated. I did not know which. I felt tears in my eyes. "Dad, are you okay?" Michael asked. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just remembering your mother." "You're going to love it there, Dad," James said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Trust us." I did trust them. That was my mistake, again and again. Sunrise Meadows was not what they promised. Yes, there was a garden. Yes, there was a pool, though it was small and often closed for maintenance. My room was small, with a single bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out at a parking lot. The activities every day that Diane had promised turned out to be bingo on Tuesdays and a movie on Thursdays, usually something I had already seen decades ago. But the worst part was not the room. The worst part was the loneliness. My children had promised to visit often. In the first month they came. James came twice. Diane came 3 times. Michael came once a week, which was more than his siblings, but still, once a week is not much when you are used to seeing your family every day. By the second month, the visits became less frequent. James was busy with the company. Diane was busy with the finances. Michael still came, but his visits became shorter, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. He would check his phone often during our conversations. By the 3rd month, I understood something. I was not moved to Sunrise Meadows because my children were worried about my safety. I was moved there because I was in their way. An old man, still legally the majority owner of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, living alone in a big house, was a problem. An old man living in a retirement community, forgotten and quiet, was not a problem. He was out of sight, and therefore easy to ignore. I sat in my small room many nights, looking out at that parking lot, and I felt something I had never felt before in my life. I felt betrayed by my own blood. I felt like a fool. I had built an empire, and I had let my own children push me into a small room with a view of a parking lot. But I want to tell you something. I am not a man who gives up. I built Hayes furniture from one small workshop. I know how to fight. And that night, sitting in that small room, something in me changed. The sadness turned into something else. It turned into determination. Before I tell you about Walter's visit, I want you to understand what those first 4 months at Sunrise Meadows were truly like. I want you to understand the depth of loneliness I felt, because it explains why, later, my anger burned so hot, and why the eventual reconciliation with Michael meant so much to me. My days at Sunrise Meadows followed a strict, unchanging routine. Breakfast at 7:30, served in a large dining hall filled with other elderly residents, many of whom stared quietly at their plates, lost in memories or simply too tired to make conversation. I tried, in those early weeks, to make friends. I sat with a man named Harold, a retired school teacher, and a woman named Ruth, who had been a nurse for 40 years before her own retirement. They were kind people, and I am grateful for the brief friendships we formed. But even good company could not fill the specific hole left by my own children's absence. After breakfast, there was little to do. Sunrise Meadows offered a small library, mostly filled with paperback romance novels and outdated encyclopedias. There was a television room, where residents gathered to watch game shows and soap operas, the volume turned up loud for those with hearing difficulties. There was the garden Diane had promised, and it was pleasant, I will admit, with a few benches and some rose bushes that a groundskeeper tended carefully. I spent many afternoons there, simply sitting, thinking, remembering. I thought about Susan constantly during those months. I thought about our wedding day, 43 years ago, when she wore her mother's old dress and cried happy tears throughout the entire ceremony. I thought about the day James was born, How frightened and excited I felt, holding him for the first time, promising myself silently that I would build something lasting for him, for the family we were beginning together. I thought about teaching Diane to ride a bicycle in our driveway, running alongside her, holding the back of the seat until she found her balance and pulled away from me, laughing with pure childhood joy. I thought about Michael, quiet even as a small boy, sitting beside me in my workshop on weekends, carefully sanding small pieces of wood, asking thoughtful questions about how everything fit together. These memories brought both comfort and pain. Comfort, because they reminded me that my life had been full of genuine love and connection. Pain, because that connection felt so distant now, replaced by phone calls that grew shorter and visits that grew less frequent with each passing week. I remember one evening in particular, sometime in late September, about 2 months after moving into Sunrise Meadows. It was a Friday night, and I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that one of my children might call or visit simply to check in, the way families often do at the end of a long week. No one called. I sat alone in my small room, the television playing quietly in the background, though I was not really watching it, and I felt a wave of loneliness so profound that I found myself crying, something I had not done since Susan's funeral. I want to be honest with you about this moment because I think it is important. In that moment, sitting alone, crying quietly in a small rented room, I did not yet feel angry at my children. I simply felt forgotten. I felt like an old, unnecessary piece of furniture that had been moved out of the way to make room for something newer, something more convenient. It was only later, after Walter's visit, after learning the true depth of what my children had planned, that my sadness transformed into something sharper, something that gave me the strength and focus to fight back. But I want you to remember this quieter moment too, this moment of pure loneliness, because I believe it represents something important about what happens to elderly parents when their children begin prioritizing convenience and financial opportunity over genuine care and connection. Loneliness, left unaddressed, can make a person feel small, forgettable, unworthy of attention or love. It took every bit of strength I had built over 68 years of life, over 40 years of running a demanding company, to eventually transform that loneliness into determination, rather than simply allowing it to consume me entirely. I share this not for sympathy, but because I believe it matters. If you are reading this, and you have an aging parent, a grandparent, any elderly relative living in a similar situation, please, call them, visit them. Do not let convenience or busy schedules replace genuine connection. The cost of that neglect, even when unintentional, even when not part of some larger scheme like my children's, can still create real and lasting pain. I want to tell you about Walter Kim. Walter was my lawyer for 35 years. He was also my best friend. We met when we were both young men, just starting our careers. He helped me write the first contract for Hayes Furniture. He helped me through every difficult moment in the company's history, including 2 recessions, a factory fire, and a lawsuit that almost destroyed everything. Walter retired 5 years ago, around the same time Susan got sick. After that, I did not see him as often. He moved to Florida with his wife. We talked on the phone sometimes, but not as much as before. Life became busy. Grief made me quiet and distant from many people, not just Walter. But Walter never forgot about me, and in August, 4 months after I moved into Sunrise Meadows, Walter called me. "Robert," he said, "I heard from a friend at the company that you moved into a retirement home. Why didn't you tell me?" I did not know what to say. I felt embarrassed. "It's not so bad," I said, which was a lie. Walter, being a lawyer for 35 years, could hear the lie in my voice immediately. "Robert, I'm coming to visit you. Next week. Don't argue with me." I did not argue. Honestly, I was relieved. I missed having someone who truly knew me. When Walter arrived at Sunrise Meadows, I almost cried. He looked older, of course, we both did, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, kind. He hugged me tightly. "Robert, tell me everything," he said, sitting down in the small chair in my room. "How did this happen?" So I told him. I told him about Susan's death. I told him about my loneliness. I told him about my children's visits, about Sunrise Meadows, about the papers I signed. As I talked, Walter's face became more and more serious. Robert, he said when I finished, do you understand what you signed? I gave James control of operations. Diane controls the money. Michael handles my personal estate, I said. I know I gave away a lot of control, but I'm still the majority owner. I still have 60% of the company. Walter shook his head slowly. Robert, do you remember the founder shares? The trust I set up for you almost 30 years ago? I had to think for a moment. It had been so long. The Hayes Family Legacy Trust, I said slowly, remembering. Yes, I remember something about it. You said it would protect my control of the company, even if my percentage of shares changed. That's right, Walter said. And Robert, listen to me carefully. That trust is still active. I checked before I came here. I still have access to the records, since I was the one who set it up. And you never removed me as a trustee alongside yourself. The founder shares are still valid. Your children do not know about them. Their lawyers did not find them because they are filed under the old trust name, not under Hayes Furniture's regular ownership documents. I felt something stir in my chest. Hope, maybe, or something sharper than hope. What does that mean, Walter? Tell me plainly. Walter leaned forward. It means, Robert, that no matter what your children have done with daily operations, no matter what titles they have given themselves, they cannot sell the company. They cannot remove you from the board. They cannot make any major decision, any decision that changes the ownership or structure of Hayes Furniture, without your signature. Because of the founder shares, you still hold the final veto power. You are still, legally, the man in control. I sat in silence for a long moment. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Walter, do my children know this? No, Walter said firmly. And Robert, I think that is very important. Because if they don't know, that gives you an advantage. You can watch. You can wait. You can learn exactly what they are planning before you act. I looked at my old friend, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than sadness. I felt like myself again, the man who built a company from nothing, the man who never gave up. Walter, I said, I need your help. You already have it, he said. What do you want to do? I thought carefully before answering. I want to know exactly what my children are doing with my company. I want to know why they really put me here. And then, Walter, I want to take back everything that is mine. Walter smiled, a small, sharp smile that reminded me of the man who had fought beside me through 35 years of business battles. Now that, he said, sounds like the Robert Hayes I remember. We spent the next 3 hours planning. Walter agreed to quietly investigate the company's recent activities using his old contacts who still worked there. He would look at financial records, board meeting notes, anything he could access without alerting my children. I, meanwhile, would play a role. I would act like the old man my children believed me to be. Quiet, confused, weak, someone who had accepted his fate at Sunrise Meadows. Meanwhile, I would watch and listen more carefully than ever before. Before Walter left that day, he gave me one more piece of advice. Robert, be patient. Whatever they are planning, let them show their full hand before you act. If you move too early, they will find a way to protect themselves. Wait until they think they have already won. That is when you strike. I nodded slowly. 40 years of running a business had taught me the same lesson, many times over. The best deals, the best negotiations, always came from patience, from understanding your opponent completely before making your move. My children thought they had already won. They thought their father was a weak old man, forgotten in a small room, with nothing left but bingo on Tuesdays and old movies on Thursdays. They had no idea what was coming. Over the next 2 months, Walter visited me every 2 weeks. Each time he brought new information, and each time the picture became darker. First, Walter discovered that James, using his new authority as CEO, had been in talks with a large furniture conglomerate called Meridian Home Group. Meridian was known in the industry for buying smaller, successful family companies, cutting costs aggressively, closing factories, and laying off large numbers of workers, all to increase short-term profit before reselling the company again a few years later. James had been negotiating with Meridian for almost 3 months, since shortly after I moved into Sunrise Meadows. The deal on the table was worth $420 million, James, Diane, and Michael, together, would receive a large portion of that money based on their combined shares and their negotiated executive transition bonuses, a clause they had written into the deal for themselves. I felt sick when I heard this. $420 million. My company, the one I built with my own hands, planned to be sold to a company that would tear it apart for profit, close the factories that employed thousands of families, and erase everything I had spent 40 years building. But it was not just the sale that made me angry. It was what Walter told me next. "Robert," Walter said during one visit, his voice low and careful, "I found something in the board meeting notes from last month. James told the other board members, the non-family board members, that he said you were suffering from early dementia. He said your mental state made it difficult for you to participate in major decisions, and that this was part of why the family had decided to move you to a care facility." I felt my hands begin to shake. "That's a lie," I said. "There is nothing wrong with my mind." "I know, Robert," Walter said gently. "I know. But this is important. If they can convince the board, and eventually a court, that you are mentally incapacitated, they can try to have you legally removed from your position of control. Even the founder shares would not protect you if a court declared you incompetent. They could get a guardianship, put your assets and decisions in the hands of a guardian, likely one of them, and then that guardian could sign away everything, including the founder shares, on your behalf." I stared at Walter in horror. "They want to make me legally incompetent?" "I believe that is the plan, yes," Walter said. "Diane has already contacted a specialist, a doctor named Frank Ellison, who is known for providing evaluations that support family members seeking guardianship over elderly relatives, even in cases where the evidence is questionable. I found an email between Diane and this doctor's office, scheduling an evaluation appointment for you, next month." I felt a coldness spread through my body. My own children, the three people I loved more than anything in this world, were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, not because it was true, but because it was convenient. Because it would let them take everything, sell everything, and walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars, while I would spend the rest of my life as a legal non-person, unable to make decisions about my own life. "Walter," I said, my voice shaking with anger now, not sadness, "what do I do?" Walter placed a hand on my shoulder. "First, Robert, we prepare for this evaluation. We are going to make sure that when Dr. Ellison arrives to evaluate you, he finds a man who is completely, undeniably, sharp and competent. We will have our own doctor present, an independent expert, to confirm your mental state on record. This will destroy their plan to declare you incompetent." "And after that?" I asked. Walter's eyes grew sharp again, the same look I remembered from decades of business battles. "After that, Robert, we let them keep digging their own grave. We let the Meridian deal move forward, just far enough that your children fully commit to it, publicly, financially, emotionally. We let them believe they have already won. And then, at the final moment, right before the deal closes, you step in. You use the founder shares, you block the sale, and you take back full control of Hayes Furniture, in front of the entire board, in front of Meridian's executives, in front of everyone." I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing everything Walter had said. Then I felt a small, cold smile form on my own face, a smile I had not felt in a very long time. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's make them regret ever putting me here." 3 weeks later, Dr. Frank Ellison arrived at Sunrise Meadows to evaluate me. Diane came with him, smiling warmly at the front desk, playing the role of the caring daughter perfectly. "Hi, Dad," she said, kissing my cheek. "This is Dr. Ellison. He's just going to ask you some questions. Make sure everything is okay with your health. Nothing to worry about." I smiled back at her, the same warm smile I had given her my whole life. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you think is best." Inside, my heart was pounding, but not with fear, with anger, carefully controlled. Walter had prepared me well. We had spent hours going over what these evaluations usually involved. Memory tests, questions about dates, about current events, about simple math problems. Walter warned me that Dr. Ellison might try to ask confusing questions or present information in a misleading way, to make an already sharp mind seem more uncertain than it truly was. This was apparently a technique some questionable evaluators used to help build a case for family members who wanted a certain result. Sitting across from Dr. Ellison in a small meeting room at Sunrise Meadows, with Diane sitting quietly in the corner, pretending to read a magazine but clearly watching everything, I answered every question clearly and precisely. "Mr. Hayes, can you tell me what year it is?" "It's this year, obviously," I said, and gave the correct answer, along with the exact date and day of the week. "Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" I did it perfectly, the same mental exercise I used to do while waiting for factory inspections decades ago, just to keep my mind sharp during boring meetings. "Mr. Hayes, do you understand that you signed documents transferring management control of your company to your children?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I signed documents giving them operational authority, while I remained chairman of the board and majority shareholder. I understand exactly what I signed." I watched Dr. Ellison's face carefully as I answered. I could see something shift in his expression, something like frustration. This was not the confused, forgetful old man he had expected to find, based on whatever Diane had told him beforehand. But what Diane did not know, what Dr. Ellison did not know, was that Walter had arranged for his own doctor, an independent geriatric specialist named Dr. Patricia Wong, to be present as well, sitting quietly at the back of the room, taking her own notes, recording the entire session with my full legal consent. When Dr. Ellison finished his questions, looking somewhat unsatisfied with how sharp and clear my answers had been, Dr. Wong spoke up. "I'd like to add my own professional observations to the record," she said calmly. "Mr. Hayes has demonstrated complete orientation to time, place, and person. His memory, both short-term and long-term, is fully intact. His reasoning and judgment show no signs of impairment whatsoever. In my professional opinion, Mr. Hayes is fully competent to manage his own affairs." Diane's face went pale. I didn't know there would be another doctor here," she said quietly. "Robert has every right to have an independent medical opinion present during any evaluation of his mental competency," I heard Walter's voice say from the doorway. I had not even realized he had arrived, timing his entrance perfectly. "It's a basic legal protection, Diane. I'm surprised you didn't expect it." Diane's eyes moved from Walter to me, and I saw something in her face that I had not seen before. Not concern for my well-being. Fear. Fear that her plan was falling apart. "Dad," she said, trying to recover, "we just wanted to make sure you were okay. That's all this was about." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice gentle, giving nothing away. "I appreciate how much you care." She left soon after, clearly rattled, and I knew that phone calls would be made that evening, calls between her and her brothers, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to figure out if their father somehow knew more than they thought he did. But I gave nothing away. I played my part perfectly. When Diane called me later that night, I acted confused about why there had been another doctor there, claiming Walter had simply insisted on it as an old friend looking out for me, nothing more. She seemed to believe me, or at least she wanted to believe me, because the alternative, that her father was quietly working against them, was too frightening to consider. That evaluation was recorded, on video and in writing, by Dr. Wong. Walter kept a copy in a secure location. This would become very important, later. For now, my children's first plan had failed. They could not declare me incompetent. Their guardianship plan was dead before it even truly began. But I knew this would not stop them. It would only make them move faster, more carefully, more secretly. And Walter and I needed to move faster too. After the failed evaluation, my children changed their approach. They stopped visiting me as often, which honestly made my acting easier. James called sometimes, but our conversations were short and distant. Diane sent occasional texts, brief and formal. Michael, my quiet son, still visited every week or two, though even his visits felt different now, more guarded, like he was watching me as much as I was watching him. Meanwhile, Walter continued his investigation. Using his old contacts at the company, people who had worked with me for decades and remained quietly loyal, Walter learned that the negotiations with Meridian Home Group were accelerating, The deal that had been worth $420 million 3 months earlier had now grown to $450 million, as Meridian became more eager to close the sale before the end of the fiscal year, for tax reasons on their end. My children had hired an outside law firm, a large firm called Braddock and Sons, to handle the sale. This firm did not know about the founder shares either, since they were working only from the standard company records, the same records my children's own lawyers had reviewed. Everyone involved in this massive deal, worth almost $500 million, was operating under the assumption that James, Diane, and Michael, combined, held enough control to approve the sale. They did not know about a small, old trust, filed away 30 years ago, that could stop everything with a single signature. Walter and I met more frequently now, sometimes twice a week. He would bring documents for me to review, quietly, in my small room at Sunrise Meadows. We began preparing our own legal case, carefully, methodically. Walter contacted a young, sharp attorney named Elena Vasquez, someone he trusted completely, who specialized in corporate governance and shareholder rights. Elena reviewed everything about the Hayes Family Legacy Trust and confirmed what Walter had told me from the beginning. The founder shares were completely valid, completely legal, and gave me absolute veto power over any sale of the company. Mr. Hayes, Elena told me during our first meeting, your children have built an entire deal, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, on a foundation that does not actually exist. They believe they have the authority to sell this company. Legally, they do not. Only you do. I felt a strange mixture of emotions hearing this. Sadness, because I still loved my children, despite everything they had done. Anger, because they had been willing to lie about my mental health, willing to sell everything I had built, willing to throw away thousands of jobs, just for money they did not need to work this hard to steal from their own father. And something else too, a growing sense of resolve, a feeling that justice was coming, slowly but surely. During this time, I also learned more painful details about what my children truly thought of me. Walter's contact inside the company, a loyal longtime employee named Grace Chen, who had worked as my executive assistant for almost 20 years before continuing in that role under James, quietly shared emails and messages with Walter. These messages, shared between my children, were difficult to read. In one email, James wrote to Diane, "Once the Meridian deal closes, Dad's role as chairman becomes purely symbolic anyway. He won't even understand what's happening. We just need him to stay quiet at that retirement home until the paperwork is finalized." In another message, Diane wrote to Michael, "I know it feels bad, but Dad built this company 40 years ago. The market has changed. We're the ones who understand how to actually grow value now. This is about business, not about being disloyal. Dad would understand if he could still think clearly, which honestly, he probably can't anymore." Reading these words felt like being stabbed in the chest. My own children discussing my mental decline as if it were already a settled fact, using it to justify stealing everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed for, everything I had planned to eventually pass down to them, with love, when the time was right. But these messages also gave me something valuable. Proof. Written proof, dated and clear, that my children knew I was still the legal owner, that they were deliberately trying to keep me quiet until the deal closed, and that they were using false claims about my mental state to justify what they were doing. Elena carefully organized all of this evidence. Grace Chen, brave enough to risk her job to help me, agreed to testify if it ever became necessary, though we hoped it would not come to that. We hoped, instead, that we could resolve this in a way that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind about who truly controlled Hayes Furniture. By early November, 7 months after I first moved into Sunrise Meadows, Walter received word that the Meridian deal was scheduled to close in 3 weeks. A final signing ceremony would take place at the Hayes Furniture headquarters, the same building where I had worked every day for almost 4 decades. My children, the Meridian executives, the lawyers from Braddock and Sons, the board members, everyone would be there. "This is it, Robert," Walter said, sitting in my small room, his eyes serious. "This is when we make our move." I felt my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, burning determination. "I want to be there, Walter, in that room. When they realize what they've done. Walter smiled that same sharp smile. I was hoping you would say that. The 3 weeks before the signing ceremony felt like the longest weeks of my life. Walter, Elena, and I met almost every day. We reviewed every document, every piece of evidence, every legal detail, over and over again, making sure there would be no mistakes, no gaps in our plan that my children or their lawyers could use to fight back. Elena drafted the formal legal notice that would inform the board, Meridian, and everyone present at the signing that the Hayes Family Legacy Trust held founder shares with veto authority, and that this authority would be exercised to block the sale. This notice needed to be delivered at exactly the right moment, not too early, which would give my children time to prepare a counterattack, but not too late, which would risk the deal actually closing before we could stop it. Walter also contacted a financial journalist he trusted, a woman named Rachel Adler, who worked for a respected business publication. Walter did not give her all the details, not yet, but he arranged for her to be present at the signing ceremony, along with a small camera crew, under the pretense of covering a major acquisition in the furniture industry. My children, eager for positive press about their successful deal, had actually invited journalists themselves, not realizing that this decision would work against them in a way they never expected. During these 3 weeks, I also spent time thinking about what I truly wanted from this confrontation. At first, in the early days after learning about my children's betrayal, I felt only anger. I wanted to punish them. I wanted them to lose everything, the way they had tried to take everything from me. But as the weeks passed, my feelings became more complicated. These were still my children. James, who used to fall asleep in my arms as a baby. Diane, who used to run into my office as a little girl, showing me her drawings, so proud of every crayon scribble. Michael, my quiet boy, who used to sit beside me in the workshop, watching me build furniture, asking endless questions about how things worked. I did not want to destroy them completely, but I could not let them destroy everything I had built either, and more importantly, I could not let them get away with what they had tried to do, not just to me, but to thousands of employees who depended on Hayes Furniture for their livelihoods, employees who would have lost their jobs if Meridian had been allowed to buy the company and strip it down for profit. Walter helped me think through this carefully. Robert, he said one afternoon, there is a difference between justice and revenge. Revenge destroys everything, including yourself, in the end. Justice corrects what was wrong and creates consequences, but it does not require total destruction. You need to decide which one you want. I thought about this for a long time. Finally, I told Walter my decision. I want justice. I want to stop the sale. I want to reclaim control of my company. I want my children to understand clearly and permanently that what they did was wrong, and that there are consequences for betraying the people who love you. But I don't want to destroy them as people. I still love them, even now, even after everything. Walter nodded slowly. That's a wise decision, Robert, and I think, honestly, it will hurt them more than pure destruction would, because you will be showing them mercy they did not extend to you, and that kind of mercy has a way of teaching lessons that anger never could. With this decision made, Elena adjusted our legal strategy slightly. Instead of pursuing criminal charges against my children, which could have been possible given the evidence of the false medical evaluation scheme, we would focus purely on the business side, reclaiming my shares, stopping the sale, removing James, Diane, and Michael from their operational positions, but allowing them to keep their original 10% ownership stakes each, the shares that were legitimately theirs from their inheritance planning years ago. They would lose their jobs, their authority, and the massive payday they had been expecting from the Meridian sale. But they would not lose everything. They would not go to prison. They would simply lose the power they had tried to steal. I also made one more decision during those 3 weeks, a decision that surprised even Walter. I decided to move back into my old house. During my time investigating the sale, Walter had discovered that my children had not yet sold the house. It was technically still in my name, held in a separate trust that Michael managed as part of my estate planning. But the sale of the house had been delayed, first because of paperwork issues, and then, I suspect, because my children became increasingly focused on the much larger Meridian deal and simply postponed dealing with the house. I want my home back, I told Walter, Whatever happens with the company, I am not spending the rest of my life in a small room looking at a parking lot. I built that house with your mother. I mean, with my wife, I corrected myself, memory and emotion tangling together for a moment. I want to die in that house someday, far in the future, surrounded by memories of my whole life, not in a rented room in a place my own children chose for me, without asking what I actually wanted. Walter squeezed my shoulder. We'll get it back, Robert. Everything that's yours, we'll get it back. As the day of the signing ceremony approached, I felt a strange calmness settle over me, the same calmness I used to feel before important business negotiations decades ago. Fear was still there, somewhere underneath, but it was controlled, channeled into focus and preparation. On the night before the ceremony, Walter came to visit me one last time. "Are you ready, Robert?" he asked. I looked at my old friend, the man who had stood beside me through every major moment of my professional life, and who was now standing beside me through the most personal battle I had ever faced. "I've been ready for 40 years, Walter," I said. I just didn't know it yet. The morning of the signing ceremony, I dressed carefully. Walter had brought me one of my old suits from the house, a dark gray suit I used to wear to important board meetings, back when I still walked into Hayes Furniture headquarters every day as its undisputed leader. Looking at myself in the mirror at Sunrise Meadows, wearing that suit again after so many months, I felt like myself for the first time since Susan died. Walter, Elena, and I arrived at Hayes Furniture headquarters at exactly 10:30 in the morning. The ceremony was scheduled for 11 o'clock. We wanted to arrive early enough to observe everything, but not so early that we would draw attention before we were ready to act. Walking into that building again after 7 months away felt overwhelming. The lobby looked the same. The same receptionist, a kind woman named Linda who had worked there for 15 years, looked up and saw me, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Hayes," she said, standing up quickly, "it's so good to see you. We've missed you here." "It's good to see you too, Linda," I said, and I meant it deeply. We took the elevator to the top floor, where the main boardroom was located, the same room where I had made thousands of decisions over 4 decades. Through the glass walls, I could see the room was already filling with people, board members in expensive suits, lawyers from Braddock & Sons carrying thick folders of documents, executives from Meridian Home Group, confident and relaxed, clearly expecting an easy, celebratory signing. And there, at the head of the table, sat my 3 children. James, looking sharp and professional in his expensive suit, already speaking confidently with the Meridian executives. Diane, sitting beside him, reviewing documents with focused precision. And Michael, quieter as always, sitting slightly apart from his siblings, checking his phone. Walter, Elena, and I waited outside the boardroom, in a small side office that Walter had arranged access to through Grace Chen, my former assistant, who was still working loyally behind the scenes to help me. Rachel Adler, the journalist, arrived with her small camera crew, setting up quietly near the back of the boardroom, blending in among the other press that my children had invited. At exactly 11 o'clock, the ceremony began. Through the glass walls, I watched James stand up and begin speaking, welcoming everyone to this historic moment for Hayes Furniture. I could not hear his exact words from the side office, but I could see the confidence in his posture, the excitement in the room, the celebratory atmosphere as champagne glasses were prepared for a toast that was meant to follow the signing. The final documents were being prepared. A representative from Meridian stood up, holding a pen, ready to sign on behalf of his company. James reached for his own pen, ready to sign on behalf of Hayes Furniture, believing, completely, that this signature would finalize the sale of my life's work. "Now," Walter said quietly. I stood up, straightened my suit jacket, and walked toward the boardroom doors. I pushed them open myself, without knocking, without waiting for permission. The room fell silent almost immediately as every head turned toward the entrance. For a long moment, nobody said anything. I watched my children's faces change, one by one, as they registered who was standing in the doorway. James's confident expression froze into shock. Diane's face went pale, her hand stopping mid-motion as she reached for a document. Michael simply stared, his phone forgotten in his hand. "Dad?" James finally said, his voice uncertain. What are you doing here? I walked slowly into the room, Walter and Elena following just behind me. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer, letting everyone in that room feel the weight of my presence, the presence of a man they had all assumed would never walk into this building again. I believe, I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent room, that I am here to attend the sale of my own company. Did no one think to invite me? Dad, this isn't the right time, James said, standing up quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. We can talk about this later, privately. No, James, I said, keeping my voice steady. I think now is exactly the right time. In fact, I think this is the only time that matters. I turned to address the entire room, the confused board members, the shocked Meridian executives, the lawyers who were beginning to whisper nervously among themselves. My name is Robert Hayes, I said. I founded this company 40 years ago, and I understand that many of you here today believe that my children, James, Diane, and Michael, have the legal authority to sell Hayes Furniture to Meridian Home Group. I am here to inform you, formally and legally, that this is not correct. Elena stepped forward, opening her briefcase and beginning to distribute copies of a document to the key people in the room. The Meridian representatives, the board members, and the lawyers from Braddock & Sons. This document, Elena announced clearly, establishes the existence and validity of the Hayes Family Legacy Trust, created 30 years ago, which holds founder shares in Hayes Furniture. These founder shares grant Robert Hayes absolute veto authority over any sale, merger, or major structural change to this company, regardless of percentage ownership held by any other party. The room erupted into confused murmurs. A Meridian executive, a sharp-eyed man named Gerald Kravitz, quickly began flipping through the document, his face growing increasingly tense as he read. This is a legitimate legal trust, Elena continued, verified independently, filed correctly, 30 years ago. Mr. Hayes has not relinquished these founder shares at any point, including in any of the recent management transition documents signed earlier this year. That's not possible, Diane said, standing up now too, her voice sharp with panic. We reviewed the ownership structure. Our lawyers reviewed everything. Your lawyers reviewed the standard shareholder records, Walter said calmly, stepping forward. They did not review the historical trust documents, because they did not know to look for them. I set up this trust myself 30 years ago, specifically to protect Robert's long-term control over the company he built. It has remained legally valid this entire time. I watched my children's faces as the reality of the situation began to sink in. This was not simply an old man walking in to make a sentimental speech. This was a legal, unstoppable block to the deal they had spent months, maybe years, planning. Dad, James said, his voice now pleading rather than confident, please, let's discuss this privately. This doesn't need to happen in front of everyone. I think it does need to happen in front of everyone, James, I said, and for the first time, I let some of my anger show through my calm exterior, because everyone in this room deserves to understand exactly what has happened over the past 7 months. I turned to address the room again, my voice growing stronger with each sentence. 7 months ago, my children convinced me to move into a retirement facility, telling me it was for my safety and well-being. While I was there, they quietly took control of daily company operations through documents I signed while grieving my wife's death, documents I did not fully understand at the time. When that was not enough, they scheduled a mental competency evaluation, hiring a doctor known for producing evaluations that support families seeking guardianship, hoping to have me legally declared incompetent so they could seize full control of my remaining assets, including these founder shares, which they did not yet know existed. Gasps spread through the room. Some board members looked at my children with visible shock and disapproval. The Meridian executives exchanged worried glances, clearly beginning to understand that this deal, and their public association with it, could become a serious problem for their company's reputation. That evaluation failed, I continued, because I brought my own independent medical expert who confirmed, on record, that I am completely mentally competent. I have that evaluation, on video, along with written communications between my children, discussing their plans to keep me quiet and uninformed until this sale could be finalized. Communications that describe me, their own father, as someone whose mental decline could be conveniently used to justify taking everything I built without my knowledge or consent. I looked directly at James, then Diane, then Michael, one after another. I loved you. I love you still, even now. I built this company for you, hoping that someday, when the time was right, I would pass it down to you with pride, trusting that you would carry forward everything your mother and I worked for. Instead, you decided I was simply an obstacle, an old man to be managed and discarded, so that you could take everything for yourselves, years before I was ready to give it, and in a way that would have destroyed thousands of jobs and everything this company stands for. The room was completely silent now. Even the Meridian executives, men and women who had built careers on cold, hard business deals, seemed uncomfortable witnessing this raw family confrontation. Effective immediately, I said, my voice returning to a firm, businesslike tone, I am exercising my authority as founder and majority-controlling shareholder of Hayes Furniture to formally block this sale to Meridian Home Group. This deal will not proceed. Gerald Kravitz, the Meridian executive, stood up slowly. Mr. Hayes, I believe, given this new information, that Meridian will need to reconsider our involvement in this transaction entirely. We were not informed of any of these circumstances. I understand completely, I said, and I apologize that you were brought into this situation without full transparency. That responsibility lies with my children, not with you. Kravitz nodded stiffly, gathered his papers, and along with his colleagues quietly left the boardroom, clearly eager to distance Meridian from what had just been revealed. As they left, I turned back to face my children, who stood frozen, their carefully built plan collapsing completely around them, in front of the entire board, in front of employees who had gathered outside the glass walls, having heard that something significant was happening, and in front of Rachel Adler's camera, quietly capturing every moment of this historic confrontation. After Meridian's executives left the boardroom, I addressed the remaining board members directly. As chairman and majority-controlling shareholder of Hayes Furniture, I said, I am calling for an emergency board vote. I propose the immediate removal of James Hayes as Chief Executive Officer, Diane Hayes as Chief Financial Officer, and Michael Hayes from his role in estate and family relations management. I will present full documentation supporting this decision, including evidence of attempted fraudulent guardianship proceedings and unauthorized company sale negotiations conducted without proper shareholder authority. The board members, many of whom had worked with me for years before my children took over daily operations, looked between each other, then toward my children, then back to me. An older board member, a woman named Patricia Simmons, who had served on the board for over 15 years, spoke first. Robert, she said carefully, we had no idea about any of this. We were told you had voluntarily stepped back due to health concerns, and that this transition was fully consensual and appropriate. I understand, Patricia, I said. None of this is your fault. You were given false information, just as I was kept in the dark about the true nature of what was happening with my company. The board vote took place immediately, right there in that room. Given the overwhelming evidence Elena had prepared, and given my legal authority through the founder shares, the vote passed unanimously. James, Diane, and Michael were formally removed from their executive positions, effective immediately. I watched my children's faces as this happened. James looked furious, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Diane looked like she might cry, though I could not tell if it was from guilt or simply from the shock of losing everything she had worked toward. Michael, my quiet son, looked perhaps the most devastated of all three, staring down at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. After the vote, the boardroom slowly emptied. Board members left quietly, some offering me sympathetic nods, others avoiding eye contact entirely, uncertain how to process what they had just witnessed. Rachel Adler and her camera crew remained, along with Walter, Elena, and my 3 children. I need to speak with my children alone, I said to Walter and Elena. Please, give us a few minutes. Walter looked hesitant, but he nodded, understanding my need for this private moment despite everything that had happened. He and Elena stepped outside the boardroom, and I asked Rachel to stop recording for this part, a request she respected, turning off her camera and waiting outside as well. Alone with my 3 children for the first time in months, The boardroom suddenly felt very quiet, very still. "Dad," Diane said first, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. I don't know how everything got so far out of control." "How did it get so far out of control, Diane?" I asked, my voice tired now, the anger fading into something closer to grief. "You are my daughter. I raised you. I taught you everything I could about honesty, about hard work, about family. How did you decide that lying about your father's mental health, trying to have him declared legally incompetent, was an acceptable way to build your future?" Diane had no answer. She simply looked down, tears now falling freely down her face. James, still trying to maintain some composure, spoke next. "Dad, the truth is, the company needed new leadership. You had slowed down significantly after Mom died. We saw an opportunity to modernize things, to grow the company in ways you weren't willing to consider anymore. The Meridian deal would have made all of us, including you, incredibly wealthy. We thought, eventually, you would understand and even appreciate what we accomplished." I looked at my oldest son with something between disbelief and deep sadness. "James, do you hear yourself? You are trying to justify lying about my mental competency, isolating me from my own home and company, and selling everything I built to a company that would have destroyed thousands of jobs, all because you believed it was ultimately for the best? That is not leadership, James. That is betrayal, dressed up in business language to make it feel acceptable." James's confident mask finally cracked. "What did you want us to do, Dad? Wait around for years while you slowly faded away, grieving Mom, barely coming into the office, while the company's potential value sat unused? We saw an opportunity and we took it. Isn't that exactly what you taught us to do in business?" "I taught you to build things, James," I said, my voice firm now. "Not to steal them. There is a difference, a very important difference, and I am deeply disappointed that somewhere along the way, you lost sight of that difference." Michael, who had remained silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke, his voice quiet and broken. "Dad, I never wanted any of this to go this far. I told James and Diane, more than once, that this felt wrong, but I went along with it anyway, because I didn't want to be the one who ruined our chance at everything they promised. I'm sorry, Dad, I really am sorry." I looked at my youngest son, and I felt, despite everything, a small flicker of hope. Of the three of my children, Michael seemed to genuinely understand the weight of what they had done, seemed to genuinely feel remorse rather than simply regret at being caught. "Michael," I said, "your apology means something to me, more than you might realize. But an apology does not undo what has already been done. There will still be consequences for all three of you." "What happens now, Dad?" Diane asked quietly. I took a deep breath before answering. "You will all keep your original 10% shares each, the shares that were legitimately given to you as part of your inheritance planning years ago. Those shares are yours, and I will not take them away, regardless of what you have done. But you will no longer hold any executive positions within Hayes Furniture. You will have no operational authority, no access to company finances, and no involvement in company decisions beyond your rights as minority shareholders." James opened his mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "This is not a punishment born from anger, James. This is a natural consequence of broken trust. I cannot place the company I built, the company that thousands of families depend on for their livelihoods, back into the hands of people who were willing to lie, manipulate, and betray their own father to seize control of it. Trust, once broken this severely, cannot simply be restored because you feel sorry now that you have been caught." I paused, looking at each of them once more. "I am also formally requesting that Grace Chen return to her previous role as my executive assistant, and I will be personally overseeing daily operations again, at least until I can identify and train appropriate new leadership built on honesty and genuine capability, rather than blood relation alone." "Are we still your children?" Michael asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or is that over too?" This question hit me harder than anything else that had been said. I looked at my youngest son, and despite everything, despite months of pain and betrayal, I felt the deep, unbreakable love of a father, a love that does not simply disappear, even when deeply wounded. "You will always be my children," I said, my voice softening. That does not change no matter what happens with the company. But our relationship, going forward, needs to be rebuilt from a foundation of honesty, something that has been badly damaged. That rebuilding will take time. It will take genuine effort from all three of you. And it cannot happen while any of you hold power over decisions that affect my life and this company's future. I stood up slowly, feeling suddenly very tired, the emotional weight of everything finally catching up with me. I am moving back into our family home this week. If any of you wish to visit, genuinely, not to discuss business, not to manipulate or negotiate, but simply to begin rebuilding what remains of our relationship as a family, my door will be open. But it will take real time, real change, and real honesty on your part before I can trust any of you again. I walked toward the boardroom doors, then paused, turning back one final time. I loved your mother very much. I know she would be heartbroken to see what has happened between us this year. Let us try, all four of us, to become people she would be proud of again. That is the only revenge I truly want, if you can even call it that. I want you to become better people, not because I forced you to through punishment, but because you genuinely choose to change. With that, I walked out of the boardroom, leaving my three children sitting in stunned, heavy silence, surrounded by the wreckage of the plan they had built to take everything from me. I moved back into my house the following week. Walter helped me arrange everything, and Michael, in what I saw as a genuine first step toward earning back trust, personally helped move furniture back into the rooms, working quietly, without complaint, without trying to use the moment for conversation about the company. Walking through my front door again after 7 months away felt like waking up from a long, strange dream. The house was mostly empty, since much of the furniture had been sold or given away before my move to Sunrise Meadows. But Walter had arranged for movers to bring replacement pieces, comfortable and simple, enough to make the house livable again. I stood in the living room where Susan's favorite chair used to sit, and for the first time in months, instead of feeling only grief, I felt something like peace settling into that empty space. I ordered a new chair for that spot, not the same as hers, nothing ever could be, but something that honored the memory of quiet evenings we used to spend together in that room. The story of what happened at Hayes Furniture spread quickly through the business world. Rachel Adler's article, published 2 days after the signing ceremony, detailed everything: the attempted guardianship scheme, the secret Meridian negotiations, and the founder's shares that had allowed me to reclaim control at the final moment. The article was picked up by larger news outlets, and for a brief period my story became a widely discussed example of elder financial abuse within family businesses, sparking conversations about the importance of protecting aging founders and business owners from exactly this kind of manipulation. I did not seek this publicity, and honestly, much of it made me uncomfortable. I never wanted my private family struggles broadcast to the world. But Walter reminded me that this exposure served an important purpose beyond my own situation. Other families, facing similar pressures, similar temptations toward exactly this kind of betrayal, might read about what happened to my children, the public consequences they faced, and reconsider their own actions before it was too late. James struggled significantly in the months following the boardroom confrontation. His reputation within the business community suffered greatly once the full story became public. Companies that might have hired him for executive positions elsewhere became hesitant, wary of associating with someone who had attempted to defraud his own father through a false incompetency claim. He eventually took a much smaller role at a different company, starting again, essentially, from a lower position than where he had begun his career originally. Diane faced similar professional consequences, though she handled the aftermath somewhat differently than her brother. Rather than trying to immediately rebuild her career at the same high level she had previously enjoyed, she took time away from corporate finance entirely, eventually enrolling in therapy, something she later told me helped her understand more deeply why she had been willing to justify such serious betrayal in pursuit of wealth and professional advancement. Michael's path looked different from his siblings from the very beginning, perhaps because his guilt had been more immediate and genuine, or perhaps simply because his personality had always been quieter and more reflective. He seemed to approach the aftermath with a sincere desire to understand and correct what had gone wrong within himself, rather than simply managing the external consequences. Over the following year, my relationship with each of my three children evolved very differently. James visited occasionally, but our conversations remained strained, often circling back to defensive justifications for his actions rather than genuine reflection. I sensed that James still believed, somewhere deep down, that his plan had simply failed due to bad luck, the unexpected existence of the founder shares, rather than recognizing that the plan itself had been fundamentally wrong from its very conception. Our relationship, while not completely broken, remained distant and cautious. Diane's visits became more frequent as months passed, and gradually, our conversations began shifting away from business entirely towards simpler things, her childhood memories, questions about her mother, quiet moments of genuine connection that had been missing for years, even before the betrayal itself. She never fully explained why she had gone along with the scheme so completely, but her ongoing effort to rebuild trust, slowly and patiently, spoke louder than any explanation could have. Michael's relationship with me healed most significantly of the three. He began visiting weekly, then eventually more often, sometimes simply stopping by after work to help with small tasks around the house, or to sit with me in the evenings, talking about nothing important, simply enjoying each other's company the way we used to when he was young, before ambition and family pressure had complicated everything between us. 8 months after reclaiming control of Hayes Furniture, I offered Michael a position within the company again, though a much smaller, more carefully supervised role than before, working under close mentorship from myself and several trusted longtime employees, rebuilding his understanding of what genuine, honest leadership actually looked like, rather than the shortcuts and manipulations he had previously witnessed and participated in. I did not offer similar positions to James or Diane. Not yet. Trust, once broken this severely, cannot simply be handed back based on time alone. It must be earned through consistent, demonstrated change, something that requires patience from everyone involved, patience I was willing to offer, but not patience that could be rushed or forced. 1 year after that dramatic confrontation in the Hayes Furniture boardroom, the company had recovered fully, stronger in many ways than before, working alongside Grace Chen and several other loyal, longtime employees. I rebuilt the executive leadership team based on genuine capability and integrity, rather than family connection alone. The factories remained open. The thousands of jobs that would have been lost under Meridian's ownership remained secure. The company continued growing steadily and sustainably, exactly the way I had always intended, before my children's ambition had nearly destroyed everything. I also made significant changes to my personal estate planning, working closely with Walter and Elena. Rather than simply passing everything down equally to my three children someday, as I had always previously planned, I established a new structure, one that would reward genuine demonstrated integrity and commitment to the company's values, rather than automatic inheritance based purely on family relation. This was not designed as permanent punishment, but rather as protection, ensuring that whatever legacy I eventually passed down would be inherited by people who had proven themselves worthy of protecting and continuing it honestly. Looking back now, sitting in my living room, in the chair that replaced Susan's old favorite spot, surrounded by photographs of my family throughout the decades, both the happy years and the difficult ones, I think often about what this entire experience taught me. I learned that love, even deep, genuine parental love, does not automatically protect you from betrayal. Sometimes the people closest to us, the people we trust most completely, are capable of causing the deepest wounds, not necessarily because they stop loving us entirely, but because ambition, financial pressure, and convenient justification can slowly corrode even genuine love, until people convince themselves that betrayal is somehow acceptable, even necessary. I also learned that vulnerability, particularly the vulnerability that comes with aging, with grief, with loneliness, can be exploited by those who claim to love us most, if we are not careful. If we do not maintain some level of protective awareness, even within our closest relationships. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that it is possible to seek justice without becoming consumed entirely by anger and revenge. I could have destroyed my children completely, used every piece of evidence Walter and Elena gathered to pursue criminal charges, ensuring they faced not just professional consequences, but potentially even legal punishment for their actions. Part of me, in the angriest, most wounded moments, wanted exactly that kind of complete destruction. But choosing instead to focus on justice rather than pure revenge, on consequences that allowed for the possibility of genuine growth and reconciliation rather than permanent destruction, ultimately led to a better outcome, not just for my children, but for myself as well. Watching Michael slowly rebuild trust through consistent, genuine effort brought me more peace and satisfaction than pure punishment ever could have. James and Diane still have work to do, real work, before our relationships can be considered fully healed. I do not know if that healing will ever be complete, and I have made peace with that uncertainty. Some wounds, even when we survive them, leave permanent scars, but I remain hopeful, cautiously, patiently hopeful, that time and genuine effort might eventually repair even the deepest cracks in our family. To anyone reading or watching this story who finds themselves in a similar situation, whether you are an aging parent worried about vulnerability within your own family, or perhaps someone who recognizes uncomfortable similarities to my children's choices within your own life, I want to leave you with this thought. Family bonds should never be treated as business transactions, weighed purely by convenience or financial opportunity. Real love requires honesty, even when honesty is difficult, even when it means having uncomfortable conversations about aging, about changing family roles, about the future of shared responsibilities, rather than quietly manipulating or deceiving those we claim to love, believing somehow that the ends justify the means. I built Hayes Furniture from nothing. One small workshop, 2 employees, and a dream of creating something lasting for my family. That company survived attempted betrayal from within my own bloodline, not because I sought pure vengeance, but because I refused to let dishonesty and manipulation win, while still leaving space, difficult as it was, for genuine forgiveness and rebuilding wherever it was truly earned. My name is Robert Hayes. I am 69 years old now. I still walk into my company's headquarters most mornings, though I have begun, finally, genuinely, training the next generation of leadership, people I trust completely, to eventually take over when I am ready to fully retire, whenever that day comes. And every evening I return to my home, the home Susan and I built together, the home my children once believed I would spend my final years lonely and forgotten within a small rented room, staring out at an empty parking lot. Instead, I sit in my living room surrounded by the life I built, patiently waiting to see which of my children will choose, through genuine effort and honesty, to truly come home again, not just physically, but in the ways that matter most.